Today, I welcome back to our show Aaron Gunn. The last time we had Aaron on, he was making a push to become the next leader of the BC Liberal Party. Hailing from Victoria, BC, Aaron is an independent journalist and filmmaker. He's an advocate for taxpayers and wants to bring common sense back to BC and to our nation. Aaron has an impressive social media presence. 13,000 followers on Instagram, 17,000 followers on Twitter, 32,000 subscribers to YouTube, and 107 followers on Facebook. Aaron is also the producer and director of the hit online series Politics Explained, which leads us to the focus of today's show. In October of last year, 2022, Aaron released Vancouver is Dying, an hour-long documentary that explores the surge of violent crime, homelessness, and drug addiction in the heart of one of Canada's wealthiest cities here in Vancouver. As of today, the documentary has amassed almost 2.5 million views and dives into the reality of what is happening in our city and who's responsible for its demise. So let's dive right into it. Vancouver is Dying is part of your Politics Explained series. As I said earlier, it's a 55 minutes long film. I got a chance to watch it on my flight home a couple of weeks ago. It's had almost 2.5 million views, which is unbelievable. Let's start by, for those people who haven't seen it, watched it, for our audience, tell us a little bit about the film.
Well, the film takes a look at, I think everyone who lives here has visited Victoria and been to the downtown east side, especially what's happening in front of people's faces, which explores the increases in crime, homelessness, and rampant drug addiction in the city, and tries to examine and investigate the root causes behind that. So that pretty much, I think, sums it up. The first half is a really heavy focus on the crime statistics, how it's changed, how policing has changed, support for policing, and the revolving door justice system, and then kind of pulls the curtain back and looks under the hood at how hard drugs and hard drug addiction is kind of fueling this increase, and some of the policies that the provincial and municipal governments have implemented over the past 20 years, and how, from my perspective, after doing the research, clearly hasn't been working.
Okay. Now, your Politics Explained series is a total, you're in season 2. There's 6 films. This is obviously the one that's in between season 1 and season 2 has had the most amount of interest. What was your inspiration for filming this in the first place?
Well, I think it's someone that's grown up in BC. I split my time between Victoria and Vancouver, and the same thing's happening over there, but just at a much smaller scale, obviously, is watching the same policies being implemented over and over again at greater expense to taxpayers. And yet, as someone who's living and visiting and spending time in these cities, the problem is clearly getting worse. And yet, if whether you're watching the news or whether, during the last provincial election, you watch the debate, instead of having vigorous discussions about these problems and people suggesting or putting forward new approaches and new ideas, we just keep recycling the same policies, or in some cases, like in the case of the former mayor, argue that the reason why the problem is getting worse is because we're not going far enough, or we're not doing enough of the same policies that we're implementing. And to me, that didn't add up. It didn't make sense. And as someone who loves British Columbia and coastal BC specifically, because it's my home, it's also quite frustrating to see the, almost, zombie-like apocalypse happening in parts of these cities, which are otherwise some of the wealthiest and most beautiful parts of the entire world.
Yeah, well said. When did you start filming Vancouver is Dying?
Filming started, to take one step back, the entire series we film all at once to save costs. We're filming all 6 episodes concurrently. So filming on that season began in April. And then I believe it was October 5th, Vancouver is Dying was the first episode we released. Okay. And we maybe wrapped filming around July.
Okay. And then you had a post-production period from July till October. How long was the actual raw footage? I mean, the finished film is 55 minutes, but how much did you have? How much material did you have to work through?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. So when we first, a couple years ago, I kind of pitched Vancouver's Dying and wanted to do it. The idea was to kind of take a deeper dive into these issues that I think required some investigation and explanation, between 10 and 15 minutes long. And there's a bit of mission creep here. The episodes keep getting longer and longer. This one was obviously just under an hour. It was the most interviews we ever did. I think we did 16 interviews. They didn't all make the final cut. Maybe there's snippets of 12 different interviews or so in there. And then footage of us walking in the downtown east side and things like that as well. So I'm not sure the total amount of footage, but there were 16 interviews filmed. Each interview probably averages like 30 minutes. So that's about 8 hours of interviews right there. And then plus the B-roll and all that kind of stuff on top of that.
Yeah, it's tough to get that condensed down into a format because, I mean, if it was a 3-hour film, it'd probably be very interesting for us to want to nerd out on it, but you'd probably you wouldn't get the reception of like 2.5 million views. Did you expect this kind of reaction? I mean, 2.5 million, I mean, you've produced lots of videos and films through your career. I got to assume this is your largest following yet.
It's by far the biggest video I've ever had for anything that's like long form. I've had some pretty viral short videos, but as far as long form, as far as YouTube specifically, which is where this video really took off, nothing comes close. And I try to set my expectations pretty broad because you never know what the algorithm's going to do with the video, what people are going to react to. It's actually a good kind of way of figuring out what issues are on people's minds.
Yeah.
But it totally kind of blew the roof off of anything that I was expecting. This was above and beyond any expectations that I had, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. It's nice to see you being able to take a grassroots kind of approach to this. I know you put your heart and soul into it, and to be able to have that kind of success, it's well deserved. And it's one of the reasons why I do Coastal Front, because I like showcasing success stories, not vilifying them. So do you mind just taking a minute to walk us through like the process? Like, when we look at that final film, was what you produced what you had envisioned at the beginning, or was it kind of like, did it take some turns along the way from when you first started?
It took a lot of turns. So I start out with, a rough storyboard before we start shooting of where I think the episode might go. And then obviously, as you do the various interviews and add new interviews, you get answers that you didn't expect to the questions. And, and it shifts as the story that you're trying to reveal shifts. And that's definitely what happened in this case. One of the things, there's a couple things that really shocked me when making this documentary. One was the clear connection between the increases in crime and drug addiction that were that were articulated directly to me by recovering addicts who had been on the street literally 18 months earlier, and it said, I had a addiction that was costing me $300 a day. So every day I had to go out and steal $300 worth of goods. And if anyone got in my way, then, they were kind of collateral damage to that drug seeking behavior. That to me was, it was always something that I kind of thought was there, that connection, but just to be put that clearly and nonchalantly, I would say, by someone who was actually living it, kind of firsthand account was kind of shocking. And I would also say the other thing was regarding, I'm sure we'll get into this a bit more, but kind of the so-called safe supply of drugs. And I was told by a couple people off the record that these drugs were being basically just handed out like candy on Halloween, but that they were being turned around and resold by the addicts to dealers, who then went and resold those drugs that are kind of like, I don't know what you want to call, like soft opioids or whatever, on college campuses, on high school grounds, these types of things, to people that are maybe just beginning their addiction, for looking for almost like a painkiller. And then the addicts were using that money to go out and buy fentanyl, which was the drug that they were actually addicted to, the high they were actually addicted to, and what they wanted. So we were basically just funding their fentanyl addiction while also providing a new source of drugs, which could be used by dealers to sell to, like I said, people on university, college campuses, that kind of stuff. And that was told to me, again, by recovering addicts, and then also people on the street of downtown East Side Vancouver that I just asked, and they just nonchalantly, the guy started ringing off the prices that you would get for these so-called safe supply drugs on the black market in Vancouver, or you could send it to Edmonton and get more money, or send it to Regina.
Amazing. Yeah.
And so I had no idea I was going to encounter this level of detail. So there's a lot of surprises making this, and some episodes more than others. But this project specifically I uncovered encountered things and uncovered things that I was not expecting.
Well, when I'm going to ask you about those in a few minutes, it almost seems like, remember that old those books you'd read as a kid called Choose Your Own Adventure?
Yeah.
You get to the end of this page and it says, go to page 12 if you want to jump off the rock or if you want to jump in the water. Sounds like that was kind of an almost analogy of what filming this was like.
Yeah, it was interesting, and it was one of these things where I would find out I really wanted to talk to someone and work to get the interview. And then once getting that interview, they would usually open a couple other doors.
Right.
Because they were in the space, in the addiction space, talking about these kind of issues.
So was there anybody that you interviewed that you're really glad you interviewed? They were maybe, they made the final cut, but they weren't even on your radar at the beginning of this process?
There was a couple, but none was bigger than Marshall Smith, who is, at the time, I didn't know who he was. He was the chief of staff to the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction in Alberta. But just like 5 or 6 years ago, he was living on the downtown east side of Vancouver,
right,
addicted to drugs and alcohol. And he's since actually been promoted. He's now the chief of staff to Danielle Smith, to the premier of Alberta.
Wow.
And I didn't know who he was, and his story was so powerful.
I bet, yeah.
And he also grew up in Victoria, and then he was working at senior level in the BC government, and then his alcohol, drinking, and cocaine use just got out of hand. And next thing you know, he was living in a shipping container in the downtown east side. And he, in addition to just laying out all of these issues, he also, now that he's in Alberta government, has a kind of knows what's going on behind the scenes with some of the activists, the kind of poverty industrial complexes, I like to call them, and also had connections with the VPD, which was able to set up kind of the tour that we got at the downtown east side. And then, of course, I ended up speaking with the chief of the Vancouver Police Union as well, Ralph Kaiser, which was also interesting.
Yeah, those were both great interviews. Yeah. Do you mind sharing what the cost was for this production?
Yeah, so I'd say roughly $15,000.
Wow.
Again, they're filmed concurrently, so most of the money is raised on like a season basis. So we go out and raise money for the season. That's impressive. Less than that because there wasn't as much travel as normal. I mean, some of our other episodes were
$15,000. That's incredible. I mean, like for those folks who haven't seen it yet, you watch this film and it'd be something I would expect to come up on my menu options under Netflix. And for $15,000 is incredible. Good for you to bootstrap that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's not easy to do it for that, and certainly no one's becoming rich on it. Should also give a shout out. I feel like an incredible editor who's just amazing.
Who's that?
Grant Woods is his name.
Okay.
He does other stuff if anyone's looking to get a project edited. But and then I got some camera guys in Vancouver who didn't have a ton of experience, but were really interested in helping out. And we did a little training and they just delivered big time. And it's, so I have a great group of people around me as well.
Yeah. Well, that's great. CTV categorized your film as both popular and polarizing. Now, obviously at 2.5 million views, it is certainly popular. Do you feel like it's a polarizing film?
No, because especially by the metrics of how the content I'm normally producing, so I know they said that. I think they just, there's going to be someone somewhere who doesn't like it. The fact of the matter is on YouTube, you can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and 94% of people gave it a thumbs up.
Yeah.
It's over 42,000 likes. So, if 94% of people have a positive response to a video that's been viewed 2.5 million times, I'll take that as close to universal
that's your
praise
test
as you're ever going to get on anything.
100%. Have any politicians commented publicly on your film?
Publicly, well, Danielle Smith gave a big tweet out to it and showed a lot of public support to it. I know she's been talking about it at all sorts of different events. A series of MPs have. I don't know if I don't want to put words in Pierre's mouth, but I know he's seen it.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't. I know he's seen it. I don't know if he's posted about it or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think this film will incite any political change?
Well, I think it has already incited some political change at the municipal level. Obviously,
I mean, this came out. You published this 2 weeks before the municipal election, and if you watch the film, you obviously highlight the fact that that a lot of this demise of the downtown east side, the rising personal violent attacks that have been happening, all happened under the administration of former Mayor Kennedy Stewart. Do you feel like your film had an impact in helping Ken Sim win?
I definitely do. I think that's hard to. I mean, it had 600,000 views in those first 2 weeks, plurality of which were in Vancouver, if not outright majority, and so it definitely impacted the political landscape. Now, maybe Ken Sims would have won by 5 points or 10 points instead of 20. It's really hard to get that breakdown, but it obviously had an impact. And
was it intentional to have this come out 2 weeks before? This is kind of your way of like skewering Kennedy Stewart and saying, here you go, pal. Or like, was there conversation between you and Ken Sim about this? Did he even know the film was coming, or was it just more coincidence?
So it wasn't. So I've never met Ken Sims or had a conversation with him or working with anyone on their team by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, the only person with political connections that we interviewed was actually a council candidate for the NPA. So not even his slate. But so the documentary was actually supposed to come out about a month earlier, and just it was delayed because it was so much longer than we expected. Now, obviously, we knew the municipal election was coming, and we knew it would have greater relevance if it was released before than say afterwards.
Yeah.
So we definitely wanted to get it out before the municipal election.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
Because it would have been on people's minds.
It was on people's minds, and that's just that's just like any media.
Yeah, it's smart
production. You're going to put it out when something's topical.
Yeah, you're not going to put a Christmas special out in the middle on Canada Day.
Yeah, exactly.
The film focuses on Vancouver's crime, homelessness, and overdose crisis. Having completed the film, has your perspective on these issues changed at all in any way?
I don't know if changed would be the right word. Definitely enhanced, perhaps. I spoke a little bit earlier about some of the blind spots that I had. Another one being, you see some people kind of parroting this talking point that there's a drug poisoning crisis, which is a narrative that I bought into, which was that basically fentanyl was being snuck into everybody's drugs, and no one wanted fentanyl. And then I found out when I was investigating, interviewing people, that fentanyl, it's actually hard to get heroin now in the downtown east. It's all fentanyl, and people are addicted to fentanyl, and they're seeking out that. And if you know anything about addiction and addicts, I mean, when you're addicted to a particular high, that's what you want. That's why it's the definition of being an addict, and you'll do anything to get it. So people were actually addicted to fentanyl. It wasn't being just snuck in the back door of people's drugs. So that was something that I didn't understand beforehand, in addition to some of the other things. But I would say from kind of 30,000 feet, the big thing that I wasn't aware of to the extent before I started the documentary was how these are all connected. Homelessness, crime, drug addiction, and mental illness, how it's all the same issue.
Yeah.
And at its core is a chronic and growing, and really, from my perspective, a government-enabled addiction crisis that's going on. On that front, another thing that surprised me was told over and over again, the vast majority of these people have places to, shelters that they could go to, but a lot of those shelters, for obvious reasons, come with a certain set of rules that you're supposed to abide by. And there's a lot of those people on the street who would prefer to live in kind of an open air, do whatever you want anarchy than abide by a certain set of rules, like no open drug use, for example, that a lot of these shelters have for obvious reasons. Because if you don't, there's a story, I interviewed a young man who had just gotten clean and needed housing. So the government said, here's a spot. They put him in one of these government-run SROs. And I think he said within 15 minutes, someone had knocked on his door and offered him to drugs. And he said no. And then I think it was about 2 hours later, he had 4 or 5 knocks on the door, and he was using drugs again. And this is how we're treating people that, a young man who's trying to get clean, who actually got clean, and then we just threw him right back into this drug-infested lion's den. And it's just the worst of all possible worlds.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I mean, if you take a look at just the annual BC Coroner's report of total deaths, and especially if you dive into the deaths by illicit drugs, and you just see this huge rising death toll, and then you contrast that with these changes in policy to things like so-called safe supply. Like, clearly it's not working, right? In fact, it's actually almost, it appears as though it's having the opposite effect of what it's been meant to do.
And we had about in the year 2000, 2001, where they instituted the new policies that were focused on harm reduction, or so-called harm reduction. We had about 150 overdose deaths a year in British Columbia, and now we're up over 2,000. I think since 2016, more than 10,000 people who are otherwise healthy. A lot of them are, young in their 20s or 30s. Over 10,000 people dead. So we're filling up our morgues with our young people who otherwise could be, tax-paying members of society, raising families and all that good stuff. These are, sons, daughters, mothers, fathers.
Way more deaths than COVID.
Way more.
This is where my cynical side says not all lives actually have the same meaning or value to politicians. They may claim that they do, but if you look at the amount of energy and resources that were put into protecting the general population towards COVID, and then you look at the lack of energy and resources put into towards stopping this death through illicit drugs. I mean, imagine if we took like a tenth of the effort that was placed on COVID, which had a far lower death rate, and put that effort in towards this, we'd have a lot better results.
And the other thing is, there's a lot of people in this country, especially ironically those on the left and the NDP, that like to always be attacking two-tier healthcare in this country. You shouldn't have two-tier healthcare for, it creates inequality and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'll tell you something. If Justin Trudeau or Jagmeet Singh's kid, God forbid, gets addicted to hard drugs, they're not getting a safe supply from the government. They're going to a 5-star abstinence-based drug recovery facility. If any member of parliament gets addicted to drugs, they're getting sent to, paid for by taxpayers, to an abstinence-based recovery program like they've been doing to get people off opioids for decades.
Absolutely.
And
I had Brian Day, who's the head of Canby Surgery, on here. And they're shut down from treating British Columbians for private surgeries, which I've had. I've got my knee surgery done there before they had this injunction by the BC government to come in. But the irony is, if you get hurt through WCB or you get hurt through ICBC, it's their two biggest customers at Canby Surgery. So it's amazing how like BC's own crown corporations can send their files to private healthcare to get treated immediately, so it doesn't have to wait in the queue at the public healthcare system. But you and I can't go and get that same treatment on our own dime. Yeah,
and I think those are both examples of there's this general kind of level of contradictions and hypocrisy in our political system and our political culture, and usually those get weaned out through robust discussion and debate, because usually the rational argument rises to the top. You'd like to see the truth would eventually come to the surface, but I don't think we're having enough of those debates and discussion, which is why things like this that you're doing here at Coastal Front, I think is so important. And obviously we need more of it, because these kind of discussions aren't happening in the mainstream media.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we're going to go into that in our political conversation, and let's just carry on with Vancouver's dying. In the film, you took aim at politicians, and in particular, I noticed the number of times you took aim at Kennedy Stewart. Do you feel the problems that this film highlights are a result of inaction by the former mayor and council?
Yeah, I think they exacerbated problems that began actually 20 years ago, like with the 4 pillars approach, where they, for those of your listeners who don't know what that is, they were supposed to, there's this new approach because we had a drug crisis, because 150 people a year were dying, which now seems like an incredible result. And they instituted this 4 pillars. It was supposed to be probably going to prevent, like, enforcement, prevention, harm reduction, and I think treatment. Yeah. And it's pretty much been all harm reduction, because it's all wrapped up in this kind of leftist ideology. And so I think the problem was getting progressively worse. And then it just basically got put on fast track under the former mayor. And one of the things that he did most transparently, I think, is completely destroy the relationship with the police. So as it pertains to crime, he
Yeah.
did not he did not support the police. He called them systemically racist.
Mhm.
He was he attempted to cut their funding. Obviously, the province had to step in and actually basically force the municipal government to reverse those budget cuts that they were trying to do on the police. So I think that, not supporting the police was really a transparent, and then just continuing the same kind of progressive obsession with so-called safe supply and harm reduction.
Yeah.
Definitely didn't turn things around, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I liked part of your film where you actually showed visually, like you showed the heads of the Vancouver Police Department to highlight the fact that this is like a very diversified group of people leading the VPD. And I in the same way that I why we started Coastal Front was to initially was to champion business leaders in our community because they get vilified. I hate how our Vancouver Police Department and actually our law enforcement in general in BC gets vilified because they're probably the most progressive, diverse law enforcement you could find in the planet. And yet they just take the same rap as some, militarized law enforcement agency in the, Midwest in the States. It's not even the same.
The amount of abuse they have to deal with, and it's a very difficult job in many cases. It's a thankless job. It's a dangerous job, as we saw in Burnaby and in Ontario a couple weeks ago now.
Yeah.
And so they really, and to then not have the support and be attacked by your own mayor and council is obviously very demoralizing. And good luck trying to recruit people because they need to keep it. There's a job shortage here to begin with across the entire economy.
Yeah.
And you need police officers. So it's I think I think voters issued their verdict on how he was managing things.
Yeah, they sure did. Aaron, do you think there'll be any noticeable change with this new mayor and council? You've got Ken Sim and the ABC party. They have what a lot of people describe as basically a supermajority. I mean, they have the ability to do virtually anything at this point from at least a governance perspective. There's nobody's holding them back. Do you think we're going to see any change?
I definitely do think we'll see a change. I think now the problems that I tried to identify in Vancouver's dying that I found are not just limited to the municipal government. So the provincial government has a huge role to play. The federal government has a role to play. But at the very least, I think the new mayor and council will be way more supportive towards the police, much more respectful to the police, provide more resources to police that will obviously help on some of the crime issues. As far as some of this spiral of homelessness, crime, mental illness that at its root is this chronic level of addiction and drug addiction. I think they might be able to make a dent in it, but a lot of that's going to have to come from the provincial government and also the federal government at the end of the day. So I think they can 100% make an impact on crime, supporting public safety, these kinds of things. But there is a very serious drug addiction problem right now in our society. I don't know how many thousands, tens of thousands, I'm sure, are currently addicted to fentanyl, heroin, and other hard drugs in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And until we get a handle on that, all these homelessness, I really view it as homelessness, crime. These are symptoms of drug addiction. Even a lot of the mental illness that people like, it's one of the new buzzwords, one of the many buzzwords of the last 5-6 years. At the root of a lot of that mental illness is addiction and drug addiction. So I think that's the municipal government has an important role to play on that, but it's they can't do it alone.
Well, speaking of drug addictions, you mentioned earlier about your interview with Cody Hall in this film, and he lived in an SRO. For those listeners who don't know what that stands for, single room occupancy. These types of hotels. In fact, when I interviewed Sam Sullivan, former mayor of Vancouver, who lives in Yaletown, he talked about the Howard Johnson Hotel that the BC Housing of the provincial government purchased, and they basically turned it into a home. Took this hotel. I think they did it for Paul's Hotel in Victoria too. I think
they did a bunch of hotels.
Bunch of them, and and I don't know what the experience has been in Victoria, but here in Vancouver, there's like there's no so-called wraparound services. There's actually no policing. There's nothing. It's literally you put these people in these hotel rooms. And then from what you described on this interview with Cody is they're almost like it's worse for them because they're just all centralized as victims to these preying drug pushers who come along and give them, a chance to get hooked back onto drugs. Do you think this is the reality for most SROs?
I do, and I think the evidence bears that out. I believe 50% of the overdose deaths in British Columbia occur in SROs or other supportive housing.
Yeah,
like inside.
That is the data. I mean, isn't that shocking?
It is, and it makes you wonder. It really makes you look back and look at that data and say, what are we doing? This is because we're also spending billions of dollars on this problem, and the results keep getting worse and worse. Yeah. And as a British Columbian resident and taxpayer who's concerned about obviously the moral aspects of this problem, but also the financial implications. It just seems we found the worst of all possible worlds. It's bad for taxpayers. It's bad for the communities that have to live with these SROs, and you have the crime that explodes in the surrounding, the radius around them. For people that just want to enjoy, walking downtown Vancouver that no longer feel safe. For our emergency services that are overburdened, and our taxpayers who keep having to spend higher and higher taxes as inflation also continues to go up, and up. And yet the results that they're getting for these tax dollars seem to be getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
And it'd be one thing if you had to pay more taxes and you saw these people all get into rehab, and I think a lot of people would be okay with that. But to watch yourself spend more and more of your hard-earned money going towards like an endless black hole where everything just keeps getting worse.
Yeah.
I think it's time to start asking questions.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned earlier, I think it was Mayor Phillips who was the one who coined this concept of 4 pillars. But if you just think of the concept of 4 pillars, there's 4 pillars with equal amount of weight, right? Mm-hmm. They have equal distribution of weight, and then those 4 pillars hold up whatever you're trying to hold up. But as you pointed out, the problem that I see as well is this push towards harm reduction by way of safe supply. And it seems like we've lost the plot on the war on drugs. We've lost the desire to get people off these drugs. It's almost like you said, I think in your film, that this is the best these people can hope for, is to just keep them on some sort of safe supply in perpetuity. And I often think back to the days of Reagan and the sort of war on drugs. And I think the reason that we lost the war on drugs is because we stopped fighting it.
I think that there's, so to your point, a lot of the people pushing the safe supply of drugs are almost treating it, and I think it's actually kind of depressing. They're treating it like a palliative issue. Like these people, this is the best that most of these people can ever aspire to in life. You have that kind of thinking reinforced by people like our chief medical officer, Bonnie Henry, who had a quote that I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially said, if you're addicted to alcohol, we've got programs that can get you off. However, if you're addicted to opioids, unfortunately, you're going to be on some kind of, the best we can do is ease your suffering, essentially,
right. Yeah.
Which really outraged the literally thousands of people that have recovered from opioid addiction, mm-hmm. who said this isn't true. This is, denying basically my life experience where I was living on the downtown east side. And now I'm, clean, have a full-time job, paying taxes and raising my family.
Yeah.
And it's a story that I heard over and over again. And really and that's actually the biggest surprise I got was the response interviewing recovering addicts. I mean, that they use the term recovering addicts, like once an addict, always an addict, always in recovery. Right. It's an ongoing process. And they were the most passionate people I had, and I featured in the documentary, these addicts sitting here that said, when I was in the downtown east side and if I was offered safe supply, I'd either still be on the downtown east side or I'd be dead. And to hear this coming from people who lived it, is much more powerful than anything I could have said or done. Yeah. And I think they spoke for themselves.
Aaron, let's pivot to the BC Liberal Party. I think today their new name is United BC. Is that, do you know the name? I'm not sure. Is that the name? United BC?
I think that's the name. I don't know if they're officially using it yet or what's going on there.
It's BC United.
BC United. Okay, thanks, Kieran. So last time you were on Coastal Front, you were here because we were interviewing candidates who were going to be running for the leadership of the BC Liberal Party. And so that's come and gone. and you were not actually even given a chance to go and run, which I was quite disappointed to see. The Leadership Election Organizing Committee for the BC Liberal Party basically said you couldn't run. What was the reason why your candidacy was rejected? I'll ask you a two-part question. What's the official reason? And what do you think's the real reason?
Well, the official reason is, first of all, I mean, you touched on it there, just so people understand. There's basically this unelected committee of 7 people called the LEOC, or the Leadership Election Organizing Committee, who make the decision. Now, obviously, it's politics, so not everything is as simple and straightforward as that. And who's actually behind the scenes, helping to exert pressure is a much longer conversation. Their communication with me and what they said publicly also doesn't match. Ostensibly, they said publicly that I didn't share their values on a series of issues. I think they mentioned reconciliation and tolerance, just a bunch of they basically threw a bunch of like word jumble buzzwords together and threw it out there. I actually love the fact in their public statement they used reconciliation, even though none of the people on the committee are Indigenous. And the one Indigenous person on the race, who was Ellis Ross, openly said, is a friend of mine, and openly said that I should be in the race. So I had no problem with it. So it was just them. I actually think it's kind of shameful to hide behind First Nations to justify your political maneuvering. What actually happened is there's two. I'm not sure the percentage, but there's 2 things that happened behind the scenes. One, a majority of the leadership of LEOC, of that committee, are openly federal liberal, and to put it mildly, I mean, the BC Liberals traditionally have been a coalition of federal liberals and some federal conservatives, and I've been pretty blunt, I would say, with my criticism of Justin Trudeau over the past 3 or 4 years. So they weren't, I think, keen on having somebody who was so staunchly opposed to Trudeau liberalism and the Trudeau government. So that was factor A. And then factor B was the other members on LEOC were kind of part of the BC Liberal party establishment, and they already had their candidate. I mean, they had Kevin Falcon from the beginning. They didn't want to really have a race. They weren't looking for an actual exchange of ideas, serious debate or discussion. They were looking for a coronation, and they had their candidate. And when it came to our campaign that we'd put together, I can't say with any. I'm not going to sit here and say with any certainty how exactly we would have done, but they viewed us. I know people on their campaign. They viewed us as an unpredictable element that they couldn't control. You rattled off some of my social media following at the beginning. Yeah, we saw how many people Pierre Poilievre signed up in the federal Conservative Party leadership online. The BC Liberals are a very weak party. Falcon won with like 10,000 votes. That is not a lot of signups. I don't know how many. I think Pierre Poilievre probably had 50,000 in BC. Yeah. So if I was able to get a fraction of that, I could have put their coronation at risk. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't something that they were willing to entertain.
You used a phrase which is the about the Leadership Election Organization Committee, LEOC, as party establishment, and that's been my observation, is that even though there's a name change here, especially under Kevin Falcon, it seems like it's just the same old BC Liberal Party.
It's lipstick on a pig. Yes, that's the new coat of paint on the old car.
Did your experience of going through that and being rejected and seeing that, is it going to deter you from wanting to run for politics again?
That's an interesting question. I think it's well, I don't regret doing it because I learned a lot. Basically, their kind of smear campaign that they ran on me when they ejected me from the race, I don't think stuck at all. I didn't lose any supporters. I gained supporters throughout the process. I learned a lot about how political parties operate in Canada. I actually think it's not. I think it's kind of a system from a bygone era. I think if you look in the United States, for example, what happened to me wouldn't have been possible. And I don't think it's democratic. There's a lot of people who don't vote or feel, apathetic or disconnected from the political process, and they ask themselves, how did we get these options? And in Canada, there's not a good explanation. I mean, you have David Eby, who's premier right now, who nobody voted for, obviously not in a general, but even in the NDP leadership race, I mean, they kicked out the only person that was credibly challenging him
Right.
on trumped up charges. So, I don't think that's a proper way to run a democracy, to be honest. I think we need more political participation, not less.
Yeah.
But I will also say that, the BC every political party is different. And the BC Liberals are definitely, kind of the poster child for elitism and, ethical or moral corruption. And not all political parties are like that. I don't think I've done stuff with the Federal Conservative Party, for example, and they still have a lot of those trappings of political parties and inside baseball, and people do get screwed over, but it's not even remotely comparable to what happens.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I mean here they I don't want to say they auction off seats, but they're not running. I mean, the BC Liberals aren't running competitive nomination races and ridings. They just hand out the ridings to whoever they want to, for whatever reason, whatever backroom deal. I mean, your guess is as good as mine.
Right.
What backroom deals are going on to give, so and so South Surrey by-election there. They just handed the nomination to someone. The Kelowna seats last time, so it's. I don't think it's a proper.
Yeah.
It's not a way to run a Democratic Party in the 21st century.
Well, I can definitely say, and it wasn't because necessarily I was supporting you or not. Just the fact that you were not able to run was a very big disappointment for me to observe from a viewpoint of like just simple democracy. Like, I mean, I think about my own grandfathers who went and fought Nazis in Germany, and like why would they do that? They went there to fight for democracy, and so for a guy like you. I don't think you're that contentious, but even if you are, I mean, the way I see it is you should have the right to run and have your voice heard. And I got a chance to interview many of the other candidates that were running for the BC Liberal Party. And I just thought, when I saw that you weren't allowed to, like, it was very disappointing for me. It really just made me feel like, oh, this is just the same old party, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people who feel the same way as myself. If we were to put that behind us, though, okay, let's just put our grudges or whatever views we may have. Kevin Falcon is the head of the BC Liberal Party. Do you feel that this guy is the long-term answer for the what is it called again? The United BC? BC United, sorry.
Whatever they're choosing to identify as.
So,
today.
So do you think he's the long-term solution for BC United?
I mean, I think he's got a pretty uphill battle. I mean, the party is. I always say, this isn't. I'll never get a job as a pundit on a talk show because this doesn't generate headlines as well. But the degree of uncertainty in politics, the uncertainty the band there, is always greater than I think most people make it out to be. So we will see. We'll see when the next election is. But I mean, if you were a betting man. I mean, there's no way you would bet on Kevin Falcon and the BC Liberals or BC United winning the next election. I think the smart money. I mean, everybody across the board is on David Eby and the NDP winning, and things can change in politics, obviously. But I think that's just where things are now. Now, I've never met Kevin, and obviously what happened. That being said, I think he is a more competent, articulate leader than Andrew Wilkinson was, who was the outgoing leader of the party. So, and David Eby probably isn't as impressive and I think as relatable as like a John Horgan was. So, so we'll see, and we'll see what happens. But there are there are a lot of structural issues with that party. So, I mean, I think Falcon's best hope probably is David Eby or the NDP mess up really bad, and then he just kind of gets the default opposition vote.
Okay, so we're going to jump into this conversation of politics, but I want to pivot to federal politics first. I had the pleasure of interviewing Pierre Poilievre shortly after Aaron O'Toole was announced as leader of the Conservative Party. I haven't had a chance to bring him on again. I'd like to. So if you're talking to him, tell him give me a call because you've interviewed him 4 times. Mm-hmm. And I like Pierre. I think he's a great opportunity for the Conservative Party to lead and compete against the Liberals in winning the next election. The next scheduled election would be October of 2025. As we've seen in the last decade and a half, we've had a lot of early elections here in Canada at a federal level. Do you think that Pierre is a good fit for Prime Minister of Canada?
I do. I think he is. I think it's actually odd to watch him. This thing that happened recently with Jordan Peterson and free speech is an interesting example. I think he's a leader. He's not someone. So many of our politicians, especially in the Conservative Party, I view in recent history as being essentially weather vanes, where they stick their hand up in the air and try to guess where the political winds are blowing and just go there. Whereas Pierre Poilievre, I think, really leads on issues. He takes stances, and through his articulation of his points and values and principles that I think a lot of Canadians shares, he brings people along with him. So there's two ways in politics to win. It's to lead the parade, or to try to find out where the parade's going and jump in front of it at the last minute and cross the finish line. Right. And Pierre, to me, is a leader, and he's very articulate. And most importantly, which I think you need in the media environment in Canada, is he's politically courageous. So he's not afraid to, stare down the media. And I think this is probably, because it's how I view the political landscape as well. And he's obviously got a huge following on social media. I remember the CBC At Issue panel ridiculing him when he announced he was running for leadership, and he's never going to win. And Jean Charest, he's got these. I mean, it wasn't even close.
Not even close.
He ran over everyone, and just made me laugh because it showed how out of touch this punditry class is. And one of the reasons, I think, is because with social media, when he's preparing his messaging, he's doing his speeches, he's communicating to people. He's writing to communicate to Canadians, middle-class Canadians across the country. And what Conservative leaders were doing before, and other politicians, were writing speeches for the House of Commons, preparing remarks, answering questions for the media to try to generate the right CBC headline. And of course, when CBC writes a story about a Pierre speech, what are they going to do? They're going to use like 3 sentences, right? So when you're writing for media, especially in the 90s and the 2000s, that's what you're doing. It's like you're repeating the same thing. You're trying to get that soundbite that the news is going to use. Well, now in the age of social media, you can just put your stuff out there directly. Yeah. When Pierre does a video that gets 500,000 views, it doesn't matter what the CBC reports on or takes. He can speak directly to Canadians. And I think that's what he's good at, and he's realized that. And
Trump championed that, right?
Trump championed that. I mean, there were
Barack Obama did, actually. Barack Obama was, he had obviously, channels like CNN on his side in the first place, but actually, out of all the politicians globally, like major politicians, Barack Obama was the first to really leverage social media and being able to communicate directly with his voter base.
Yeah, so Obama really started that trend. You saw Trump do it in his own way, and then that whole having that leadership. I also think it's this is going to get too much in the weeds, but it happened in our economy. You're obviously familiar with specialization and things like that, and it's happened in politics as well, where for a lot of cases the prime minister has become almost like a PR spokesperson. Trudeau's not writing any of his own speeches or coming up with policies. Basically, just the pretty face that's presenting them all. And I think that disjointedness is an issue because people want to know who they're voting for.
Yeah.
And I think Pierre gets back to that a little bit. He is the brains behind his own campaign. He's got lots of smart people around him, but he thinks about these issues. He's well informed. When I do my interviews on him, he's not preparing. He knows the issues inside and out. And
he's completely authentic. It's amazing.
Completely authentic, and it reminds me more of a Thatcher or a Churchill, and someone who's their own person, own man in his case.
To be a devil's advocate, where do you think Pierre needs to make improvements on? Where do you think is going to be his biggest challenges in trying to, if we did go into a general election? He's the votes that both he and whoever's going to run for the Liberal Party are going to working for is not their voter base. The Liberal voter base will vote for whoever's running the Liberal Party, and same with the Conservatives. There's that middle group of swing voters, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think is going to be Pierre's challenges in convincing certain people to swing his direction?
Well, his overarching challenge and the challenge for the Conservative Party will always be the fact that you have to fight against the Liberals and the media. And the media in this case have even more, it's not like their normal, left of center bias. Their jobs are on the line. Like, the CB, if you work for the CBC, your job's probably on the line if the Conservatives win. If you work for one of these media organizations that have gotten over $650 million in media bailouts, your job's probably on the line. So that's going to be a challenge, to say the least. And as far as from an electoral perspective, Canada is, despite its size, is a very urbanized country. A lot of the swing seats are in the suburbs of especially Toronto and Vancouver. You have a lot of new Canadians that live in these areas, so being able to reach them and communicate with them is going to be his challenge. And obviously he's trying to do that, and I think he's had some success, and we'll see if that translates into the next election. I'm sure if there was an election held today, he would win. Maybe a minority government or something like that. So we'll see how I don't think there's going to be an election soon, and we'll see how.
Well, that was going to be my next question. So the next scheduled election would be October of 2025. This is January of 2023. So we're basically talking almost a full 2 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we'll see an election before October of 2025?
I do, but I don't think it'll be much before. I think it'll be probably either in that spring. Or fall before that. So what's that, 2024? So yeah, I think
2025, like spring of 2025.
Yeah, that would be my guess if I had to guess. But we'll see. I'll put it this way. I really don't think there's going to be an election in the next year.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't shock me either if it went the full 4 years, which I don't think has ever happened in history. The thing about politics,
what, with the minority government, you mean?
Yeah, I could be wrong about that.
I'm not sure,
but I don't think it has. I think Harper went 2.5 years once. The big thing is that these political parties, I mean, they're all self-interested bodies. So for an election to happen, essentially, either it's going to have to be in the Liberals' best interest to call the election, or it's going to have to be in the NDP's best interest to bring down the government. Right now, it's in neither of their interests. Yeah. But if one of those things change, we could find ourselves in an election quickly. I don't see that changing, but I can't even remember. A week in politics is a week is a lifetime in politics.
Yeah.
And so something could happen. Trudeau could, get himself in another huge scandal, and the NDP see an opportunity or something like that could happen. So we'll see.
So Aaron, here's my take. Here's my 2 cents on where I think we're going. I agree with your comment. There's only two people who are going to call this election. It's going to be either Trudeau or Jagmeet Singh. It's the only two, right? I mean, the Conservative Party can't pull it off. The Bloc Québécois don't have that kind of power. I believe that the NDP will not call an early election. I don't know. I can't imagine any circumstance under which it's to their advantage. They are near bankrupt, like financially bankrupt political party that every election has lost seats. So I think they're not going to move away from Jagmeet Singh. I think they're stuck with him because he's done a good job of like being this sort of good. If you need a spiritual leader in Canada, like that's my guy, right? But as far as being a prime minister, I mean, there's just no chance. But they're stuck with him, and they can't afford another election because financially or for their seats. So I just can't see that happening. The Liberal Party, of course, could do that. I kind of vision this as like Pierre Poilievre is like that up and coming boxer. He's like the Mike Tyson who's coming up the ranks, and like everybody sees him and nobody really wants to fight him because they're worried about losing. But as time goes by, he actually gets better, and so there's even more reason to not want to fight him. I think what's going to happen, and I also think that Justin Trudeau is becoming quite. His past his due date with the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party will eat their own, right? Like I think that he has to find himself his own exit, or they will bump him out anyways. I don't think Trudeau will ever want to go against Pierre in a general election because he's going to lose. That's my opinion. So I think what's going to happen is somewhere between now and probably the end of 2024, we will see. So actually, I said earlier it's 2 years, actually 3 years, right? Mm-hmm. Almost 3 years. So I think somewhere between now and the end of 2024, you will see someone else, maybe it's a Chrystia Freeland or somebody else, take over from Trudeau to try and refresh the brand and reinvigorate their voter base and those swing voters in the middle, with some hope that they, going into October of 2025, they can beat Pierre. But I look at the momentum that Pierre is creating for himself, and it's just getting bigger as the months go by. And I actually think that the media like CBC, they're a good sort of indicator. Like they're trying even harder than before to like discredit this guy. So I think like that shows you the kind of momentum that he's building. So anyways, that's my take on where I think we're going federally.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say, talking to people in Ottawa, is don't underestimate the arrogance of Trudeau. Like I mean, he's a good campaigner. He's very good on the campaign trail, but he thinks he's really good. Like, I don't think he thinks he'll lose to Pierre. And I think he will think that he can beat him. I think those two really don't like each other. I think that's also quite genuine, genuine dislike there.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I'd love to see a Trudeau Poilievre showdown. That would be pretty awesome.
It'll be and, you know, by the way, I will say, for my critiques on the BC Liberals compared to federal, like, you know, Pierre leading the Conservative Party going against Trudeau. I mean, that's healthy for democracy in the sense that that's a clear choice where voters get to decide the future of the country that's being laid out for them. And in BC, I don't really think we have that kind of contrast.
Right.
And I think contrast is good for democracies.
Yeah, I agree. Well, leading into provincial politics then, as you mentioned earlier, David Eby was sworn in as the 37th Premier of British Columbia, replacing John Horgan as the leader of the BC NDP party. Do you see much change happening under David Eby versus what we saw with John Horgan?
I think it's to be seen. I mean, if Horgan, he got sick. I don't know if he got sick during COVID. I can't remember exactly the timeline of events, but during COVID, the provincial government really kind of took a hands-off approach and just said, you know, handed it over to Bonnie Henry and everything.
Bonnie and yeah.
And, you know, BC Health or whatever. And then
Adrian Dix. Adrian Bonnie were the two leaders.
Yeah, and then Horgan tried to, I think, honestly, it probably worked out well for him politically, just kind of tried to play the benevolent, you know, king or whatever that was kind of removed from this. So if his government made a bad decision, he almost like didn't wear it because he was like, it wasn't him doing it, and he could kind of backtrack. I remember there's the museum fiasco as well, and in Victoria.
Yeah.
So,
but let's be honest, that's pretty minor. I mean, like that was like, you know, out of all the scandals that the NDP have had from the past days, I mean, they didn't even actually write a check for the BC Museum. They made a call and then they quickly reversed their decision to cut the political damage.
Yeah,
so,
but it was just interesting how the NDP and a couple different files had been able to kind of reverse themselves, but like Horgan didn't really wear it because it was like somebody else reversing themselves, and Horgan wasn't really seen as a hands-on premier. I think that actually worked for him. David Eby seems much more hands-on.
Yeah.
Which could go two ways, because if the NDP make mistakes or get caught wasting taxpayers' money or the problems and with crime and everything continue to persist, I think he'll wear them a lot more. Whereas Horgan seemed kind of almost removed from those day-to-day issues.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see. I think it's
as a local British Columbian, probably not an NDP voter, but living here in this province, are you more excited about having David Eby as our premier, or would you, if you could wave your magic wand, would you still prefer to have John Horgan?
Well, I'm in a unique position because I'm involved politically. I mean, I like John Horgan more. I think that might be also being from the island. So I don't know so I knew John Horgan growing up. I was going to say,
I figure you must say John Horgan because like he's from Langford and you're from Langford.
Yeah,
right?
I know. I played hockey with his son and Wanda Fuca.
Okay.
And John and my dad would be up in the stands talking and everything.
Yeah.
So before he was an MLA. So I prefer John. I also think John is from the moderate wing of the NDP. Now, David Eby I know less about. I don't think he's from, I said moderate wing. I think John Horgan is from the labor wing of the NDP is maybe more accurate. I think Eby's got more of an activist background, but I also think he's intelligent and obviously knows that, you know, if the NDP don't stay somewhat close to middle of the road, they will get booted out of office. So I think he's smart that way, and these politicians. The interesting thing I'll tell you, when I was running that campaign for 2 weeks for BC Liberal leadership. So I hadn't had a lot of conversations with MLAs prior to that, but during that 2 weeks, I sat down with a lot of them, like I think around a dozen.
Really?
And the thing that amazed me the most is I was going into it thinking, okay, where is this person on the political spectrum? Are they more conservative? Are they more towards the liberal side? What issues matter? Are they going to be concerned about, you know, my opposition to the carbon tax or you know, like where are they going in? And it was amazing how basically none of them cared, and all they cared about was like, how are you going to win the next election? how do I win my seat in the next election? So I would never underestimate how most politicians, their sole and overriding focus is winning, basically.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing in a democracy, because it means, basically enacting policies that the public supports. But I think it's just important to remember to view things through that framework.
Yeah, it's well said. So the next general election for British Columbia is meant to be in 2024. We have a majority NDP. So unlike the federal government, there's no chance of the BC Liberals or the two BC Greens, calling an early election. So a first question would be, do you see a potential of any kind of early election here in British Columbia?
I do. I don't. I've been told. I mean, there's different schools of. I mean, the conventional wisdom seems to be. I mean, David Eby, I think, has said publicly there's not going to be, or wasn't going to, but so I think the short answer is we'll see. It definitely, there doesn't have to be, but I also think that, look, the NDP are way up in the polls right now. The BC Liberals don't even know what the name of their party is at this current moment.
Yeah.
They're in disarray.
We certainly don't.
Yeah, we don't. They're 13, 14 points behind in the polls. And I think David Eby, honestly, from a Democratic perspective, unlike when Horgan pulled the plug on his own government early, I actually think David Eby has a Democratic, would be justified in doing so, because nobody voted for him, and he's got this new set of policies he wants to enact, and the opposition has a new leader. And yeah, I honestly don't. I think he'd be somewhat justified in calling an election, but so we'll see if he does or not. But if it's politicians, if they see the polls a certain way, and there's a big because of inflation, a big revenue surplus that they can promise a bunch of things, then you never know.
Yeah. So let's assume there is an election, either an early one or takes place end of 2024. Do you think that Kevin Falcon really has any chance of beating David Eby in the next election?
I mean, I think he has a chance, but I think it's a small chance. And I think probably, which is one of the reasons why I think there could be an earlier election, is because I think the longer you wait, the greater the uncertainty grows. Again, a week in politics, or a week is a lifetime in politics. So who knows what will happen a year from now? There could be scandals, and all sorts of different things could end up occurring. But I think, look, Kevin Falcon is going to be. He's going to be. It'd be generous to say he's the underdog. I would say that.
Yeah.
And the smart money is definitely on the NDP.
Yeah.
Winning another election.
For what it's worth, my view is that we don't have an early election, only because I don't see any reason why, other than maybe the one you pointed out, which is maybe David Eby feels like a moral obligation to prove that he's meant to be the premier of the province. But they're in such good spot in the polls. They've just announced recently a huge surplus, which no one was expecting. So they can't even, the BC Liberals can't even claim that, they're being foolish with taxpayers' money, because there's just an abundance of money. And I think personally, my expectation is the economy is going for a deep south dive here in 2023, and that politicians are going to be ones who take the brunt of that as elections roll through globally. I think we're going to see a global recession, and people are going to get voted out, whether they're on the right side or left side of the spectrum. If they're in power, they're going to get voted out. But I think that it's not going to be bad enough that by the time the election comes in 2024, the people are going to want to skewer the BC NDP, unless there's some kind of scandal like we saw with fast ferries years ago. And I just don't think that Falcon has the ability to lead this BC Liberal Party, even if there was some uncertainty around there, or some kind of scandal or some uncertainty about the economy. So my take is that we've got a BC NDP party for at least another probably 6 years. That's what my take is.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty accurate. The other factor, I've been helping them out a bit, but there is the newish BC Conservative Party, which will be interesting to see how they formulate themselves before the next election. But there's also
well, if an organization like that got traction, it would even be more reason why there's the vote split. I know Mo Amir is he doesn't believe in vote splitting, but I think it's totally real. And if you all of a sudden had a decent candidate for the BC Conservative, unless they really had a Pierre Poilievre kind of social media following and charisma, you now it's even more reason why the BC NDP would, because you'd be splitting the right side of the vote.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I mean, I would say probably justifiably so, in the sense that the one thing I'll say about like the BC Liberals, the BC United Falcon, I don't think they deserve to win the next election. I mean, I'm no fan of the NDP, but I also think you kind of reap what you sow in life or politics as in life. And I mean, I don't think they've offered anything to voters. They haven't changed.
They just seem like the same old party. I mean, there's a lot of the MLAs are still the same people from back in the Gordon Campbell, Christy Clark days.
They were in power for so long. They became, addicted to power and the benefits of having political power, being able to, all the benefits that you accrue along with that. And, they kind of want to do anything to get it back. But I don't think that's how you should be. I don't think that's why you should ever get into politics or democracy. Yeah.
So Politics Explained, you've completed season 2 with your 6th series. Obviously, this knockout Vancouver is Dying film, which is 2.5 million views. What's next for Aaron Gunn?
Well, what's next? In the coming weeks, there's a couple things, but so I'm going to keep pumping out the videos. Try to return to doing some short stuff, which actually was my bread and butter before Politics Explained, and kind of racked up some of my biggest views. And then I think there'll be a decision here at the end of the month about whether to potentially do a 4th season of Politics Explained. I thought
a 4th or a 3rd?
4th.
Yeah. Oh, I apologize. Was this season 2 or season 3?
This was season 3.
Yeah, I apologize. I said it a couple times season 2, but it's season 3.
Yeah. I mean, they're all standalone episodes, so people jump around and watch them. However, so we've done there's 7 ones, so 19 episodes. So whether we're gonna do another one, it's actually the process I like the most, because right now we have a long list of like 20 potential topics, and we start weaning it down, and what do we think people want to care about? What interviews can we get? So conversations around potentially doing that. And then on the political front, we will see. I've got, obviously I'm a big supporter of Pierre, so we'll see how that develops. There is this provincial Conservative Party, which I know some good people that are involved in. So I think it won't be uneventful. Maybe that's all I can say about the future.
I'm sure it won't be.
Yeah.
Well, Aaron Gunn, thanks for being on Coastal Front once again. It's nice to have you back here and talking about these topics. Congratulations on Vancouver is Dying. For those folks who haven't watched it yet, go onto YouTube, search Aaron Gunn, AARON. You also have a website, and you obviously social media.
Yeah.
What's the best way to follow you? I guess would be Facebook, 107,000 followers.
Yeah. You can always go to aarongunn.ca, but to really watch my content, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. I mean, pretty much wherever you consume your content. I mean, go to one of those social media platforms and you can follow or subscribe. And the other thing is, I thought today while we're here, there's a happy birthday due. So I would like to wish a happy birthday to Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, obviously founder of the country. And
do you have a statue?
I got a book for you here.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Look at this.
So
John A. Macdonald. There we go.
That's the first part of a 2-part. It's a 2-part biography. That's up to Confederation, and it really heats up. So if you enjoy the first part, I would highly recommend checking out the second part.
Have you read it then?
I have. And it's actually such an incredible. I mean, no one tells this story. I mean, you never hear about this incredible. I mean, really, without him, I don't think this country would even exist.
Yeah.
So if you love Canada, if you like what he built with the Followers of Confederation back in 1867, despite our flaws, and think Canada's been a net force of good for the world, I strongly encourage people to learn more about Macdonald and about Canadian history. And he'd be turning. His birthday was in 1815 today. So he's 208, I guess, if you were still alive.
Okay, well, thank you for the book. The big, thick book, good to read over spring break. Aaron Gunn, congratulations on your film, Vancouver's Dying, and thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.